All right, welcome to What's Lurking on Your Network. The goal of today is to help everyone understand that you may already have problems on your network that need to be addressed. You may already, in some cases we'll talk about, may already have something or someone poking around on your network and you're not even aware of it yet. And so that's the goal of this, to help you understand what to look for, how to make sure that you're covered, CYA or CYB, whatever you want to, whatever acronym you prefer to use, and make sure that your data and your business are safe from potential breach. So first, for those that don't know, I am owner of Nwaj Tech, but I also I am the chair of the Cybersecurity and Tech Committee for the New Haven County Bar Association, member of Tech Committee for the Mid-State Chamber of Commerce, member of the 405D Federal Task Force, and they actually just invited me to an event in DC in November. And then a member of the Nist Privacy Work Group. I do believe that we should have some privacy rights. It's a little hard these days to, fully 100% not be found, but not everything should be available either. Do you know? So the first question is, and so I got a little poll, launch. I got 4 of these today. So when was the last time you audited your business IT and physical location? So a lot of misconception in the IT world is that we only care about your computers, your servers, your network equipment, maybe your phones. That's actually not true. When I do a risk assessment, I also look at the physical location. What are the chances you might get hit with a flood, a hurricane, a blizzard, tornadoes, depending on where you are. And these are common questions for some areas of the country too, where they're more susceptible to extreme weather. Connecticut has gotten there in more recent years, but these are all the kind of questions you should be asking. Is there camera access? How close are you to the main road? What does your physical security look like? What kind of locks do you have? How do you get into the location? Things like that. This is a kind of a quick recap of how a ransomware / data breach could happen. This is one of the more common ways it happens. So a business network is compromised often through some form of social engineering. And what that means is they've somehow gained access, because a lot of times it's a phishing email saying, your password's expired on your Microsoft account. Click here to reset it. And they click the link. It takes them to a page that looks like Microsoft. It's not Microsoft. The attackers now have their password. One of the things that's popped up over the last this year, I suppose, 6 months or so, is they'll get a phone call in the middle of the night saying, or asking for the code that they just received a text message for. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, you're half asleep, you give the code thinking it's a business purpose, and it's really not. It's a hacker in another part of the world. In this case, it's been happening a lot from Brazil, where they take that code and then log into one of your accounts. A lot of times they, as we'll see in a few minutes with some of these slides, they find the information already available somewhere out there, whether it's on your own network or on the dark web or somewhere along the lines. They find usernames and passwords, or they put together a profile and say, okay, well, we know this person's birthday is March 7th, 1975. And they use that as a way to kind of figure out a password. And I've done that, so I know it can be done. Attackers will remain on a network often for months or even years before attacking. So they will poke around and they will see how far they can get before they launch the actual attack. So they could be there for a long time before anybody realizes they're there. So I'm going to talk about the SolarWinds incident a little later, but that's an example of being on the network for a while. If you have a website hosted somewhere and it's shared hosting, they may be on that company's servers for a long time before they actually launch an attack. And that has happened, I think late last year, it happened to a web hosting company. They will exfiltrate data to a C2 server, that's command and control server. So they take whatever data they find, They don't care what it is, and they send it to their own server, and then they go through it to see what they have. They'll take things like proprietary data, sensitive data that'll include like social security numbers, healthcare information, and then they'll, national security, obviously, if they get into a federal server or something like that. Attackers will encrypt your data and demand a ransom. That's the most common, that's what people are most familiar with at this point. So the data gets encrypted, they can't access it, their business comes to a crawl, they can't do anything. In the case of healthcare, the hospitals come to a halt, and that's happened many times in the US already. And then they demand a ransom. And in a hospital's case, it could be in the millions. The Irish Health, I don't remember the exact name of the agency, but it was Irish. In Ireland, they have a national health care agency. They demanded $50 million. I don't know if that was paid or if anything was ever paid, but they demanded $50 million. Attackers will post stolen data to dark web for sale. So they will also take your data and they will put it on a website on the dark web, and sometimes even on the regular internet, and sell it. And they will sell it often for just a couple of dollars per record. So my information could be for sale on the dark web, and that could include social security number, credit card numbers, healthcare information, all of that stuff, and it could only be a couple of dollars for all of that information. Sometimes attackers will contact your clients to report their data was stolen. So if I get breached, they may reach out to my clients because now they have that data, and they may say, hey, client XYZ, did you know that Nwaj Tech was breached and we have your information? That it can be really bad for branding. And then, of course, at that point, you have no way to deny, not that you're supposed to, but you have no way to deny that there is a breach at that point. Attackers are now allowing victims to preview stolen data. So now, not only will they put the data for sale on the dark web, not encrypt all of the data on your systems, now they will say, hey, take a look at what we have. You don't believe we have it? Here's what we have. And they will let you look at it and then demand even more money now because maybe there's some data there that you didn't know they have. And it can be, if they have your client's data, let's say social security numbers or credit card information, probably the most common thing for most businesses, that's big exposure, and that could scare people into paying a ransom. And that's the goal of the ransomware groups. So some ransomware groups are now allowing the victims to preview the data. So here's another question. This one I did take a poll on LinkedIn as well. So I'm curious to see how this goes here. Would you pay a ransom demand? So your business is encrypted, all the data is encrypted, you can't do any work, you don't have a way to restore the data. Would you pay the ransom demand? No, that's the best answer. Can you believe only 50%, 57% of people on LinkedIn said they would not pay the ransom flat out. 29% said it depended on the demand. The demand has increased. I remember when ransomware attacks started happening, and it's been a while, at least 10 years, maybe more. My wife's uncle called us up one day because their personal computer, had a ransomware attack. So everything was encrypted on the computer, and it said, pay us $200 or we'll report you to the police. And they claimed that they had some information on it. They didn't. There was nothing wrong. And they called us to see if we could fix it. And I told them, you don't need to pay anything. They're not going to do whatever they say they're going to do. And we can just, they didn't have any data on the computer anyway. It was a, kid's computer in the playroom. $200, that was the demand. Now we're in the millions every time. So good answer. 14% asked if their insurance would cover it. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I'll get to that in a minute. Next question. What is your password policy? I talk about passwords a lot. Can you read? I don't know. Looks like some
Yeah, I can.
truncated. Okay, there we go. That's awesome. So I like to see that. Passwords, they're going to go away eventually, and to some degree, Microsoft has already started ending the password trend. But it's going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of education. And so what Microsoft does in some instances is, depending on what it is you're logging into, they'll just send a notification to a phone or to a device you have to approve the login. So that's how you log in instead of using a password. And so that's based on something you have. So that's awesome that you're doing that, though, because for the most part right now is strict password policies, and two-factor or multi-factor authentication is the way to go. Now for some scary statistics. 46% of all organizations still store passwords in shared documents. And I worked the last job I had before I started this business. They did this. They had a spreadsheet on a shared drive on the network that had all the admin passwords. So if I needed to log into a specific server, this was a very large organization, tens of thousands of employees. I'm not sure the exact number, spread throughout the world. So not just in the US and other countries as well. And they had a spreadsheet, or they had multiple spreadsheets on a server with admin credentials. So if I needed to log into a specific server, I'd go to this server, look up the admin credentials, and then go to the server in question and log in with those admin credentials, rather than providing specific access to the people that needed it. It's very dangerous, because if somebody gets onto that server, or even insider threats, an employee within the company wants to look this information up and then sell it, which often happens. It's a way for hackers to get that information. We see this common portrayal of hackers in the movies, where they're doing all this typing on a keyboard, and you see a screen with all command line stuff, and it's flying through, and that does happen. But what's more common is they find the easiest and weakest way into a network, and a lot of times it's a person. In this case, it's someone is willing to sell that information to someone else for usually not a lot of money. 45% of reported data breaches are the result of credentials stolen in previous attacks, guest credentials, or previously leaked credentials. There is about 2 leaked credentials per person on this planet. I think the number was 16 billion, meaning 16 billion username and password are on the dark web and can be purchased or even downloaded in some cases for free. And then what happens is people will use those, the bad guys will use those to try to hack other things. You may remember, I think it was about a year and a half ago, there was a lot of talk about Ring cameras being vulnerable, and they were not vulnerable. What happened was people were using credentials, usernames and passwords that were available on the internet already. And that number grows every day. 39% of data breach costs are incurred more than a year after data breach, meaning after 1 year, we're still recovering. We're still implementing new things to protect our network, our data. We're still maybe remediating some of the effects of the data breach, depending on what it was. There have been reports from some businesses where there are servers 1 to 2 years after that are still not recovered because they're encrypted and they have no way to recover it. 95% of cybersecurity breaches are caused by human error. Almost always a human is involved somewhere along the way in an attack. And then in the first quarter of this year, 1 million successful phishing attacks. First time that's happened, that we've topped 1 million. So successful meaning the phishing attack, phishing emails. I don't even know anymore at this point, probably dozens a day. I know what to look for. It doesn't happen. They don't succeed against me, but a lot of people, and they're getting more sophisticated. So some of them are pretty obvious, but some of the other phishing emails are not as obvious and can trick people into clicking on links or downloading documents that will launch malware. things like that. Over 1 million in the first quarter of this year. That's the first time that's ever happened. And so how does this happen? Hacking used to take a lot of coding, a lot of knowledge, a lot of computer and network knowledge. It doesn't really anymore. This is a version of Linux that's free to download and comes with a ton of software on it. That sole purpose is for hacking. Now, hacking has three hats, really. There's actually more than that. So you hear about white hat hackers, gray hat, and black hat. Black hat are what we call the bad guys. White hat are supposed to be the good guys. This operating system was created for the good guys, but the bad guys also use it, because whatever the good guys can do, the bad guys can do too. So if I use software, and I'm going to show one in a moment, to look for vulnerabilities, they're going to use the same thing. And the difference is they're going to try to exploit the vulnerability. But this is all free. All you need is a computer to put it on. And you can run it as a virtual machine for free. I do that on the computer I'm using right now. So how do we protect ourselves? Well, there are cybersecurity frameworks, and I've done presentations on what the Nist cybersecurity framework is and what it looks like. It's pretty. There's a lot of detail involved, and then we only touch the tip of the iceberg when it comes to cybersecurity, the Nist cybersecurity framework. However, we're going to talk about one specific aspect of a cybersecurity framework, primarily the Nist one today, and how it should be used to protect your data, your network, your business, your identity, your clients' identities, and everything in between. Because it's not going to take much it doesn't take a lot to get in these days. It's very easy because most of the time they're preying on human vulnerabilities. So framework, CSF is short for cybersecurity framework. There is the framework for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. So critical infrastructure are things like the electric grid, nuclear power plants, things like that. There is the Nist cybersecurity framework, and they also have another one that's 800-171. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology's special publication. There's the FedRAMP. That's for mostly for federal or anybody that works with the federal government, but can be used by let me close this. Can be used by anybody, because essentially they all are fairly similar. There's some requirements for each one. The Center for Internet Security's Critical Security Controls for Effective Cyber Defense, or ISO 27000. Those are the most well-known cybersecurity frameworks in the US. We're going to talk about identify. So we're going to talk about asset management, risk assessment, and supply chain risk management. And that's not even all of identify, but these are the three big areas that I want to talk about today. So this is going to help us figure out what's lurking on our network. How do we know what's going on our network? And so the first piece of that is asset management. We need to identify what's on our network. And I could tell you 9 times out of 10, the business is not even aware of everything that's on the network. And why does that happen? So first of all, you want to take an assessment of what workstations, laptops, servers, printers, networking equipment, and so forth on your network. So the typical IT network stuff. But you want to take that a step further. Do they all have supported software? I was in a business just a few weeks ago. They were running Server 2008. That has not been supported in a while. And that particular server had not been updated in a while. And that particular server didn't really serve too much of a purpose. It was only being used for file storage, and they had another device for the same purpose. So it was unnecessary at that point. That server is a way in for an easy way in for an attacker. So they've looked for vulnerabilities for Server 2008 that hasn't been patched in years. I'm not sure when the end date was for that, but it's been a long time. and easy to exploit at that point, because there's no security updates. There's nothing to prevent an attacker from getting in. Check for rogue networks. So sometimes, and mostly it happens a lot in a larger business, they'll plug in a router into the existing network to have another wireless network or another network that's not secured like the existing network is. So now you have a rogue wireless hotspot on the network. I've seen this happen in larger corporate environments. But also, what's to stop me from, going to a Starbucks and setting up my phone or a hotspot as a Starbucks Wi-Fi and just name it Starbucks. I could easily do that, and then they would connect to my phone rather than to Starbucks network, and I could potentially steal data that way. This could happen in airports. This can happen in hotels. It happens a lot in these scenarios. But also, what firewalls do you have? What routers do you have? Do they have the latest firmware? A lot of times, networking equipment does not get the same prioritization as your computer. So your computer, you get a notification. It says, Windows has an update. You download it, you install it, you reboot, and now you have the latest update. Well, nobody's doing that for routers and firewalls because you're not seeing those notifications. So how do you know it has the latest update? Are unused ports disabled? I just logged into a router last night. They had file transfer protocol port enabled and open. This is very dangerous because FTP, file transfer protocol, has been looked down upon for years because it's not secure. All the data is being transferred in clear text, including passwords. IoT devices, Internet of Things devices. I was in another business not too long ago, installing a new computer, and noticed when I was connecting them to the network that there were 2 new smart thermostats. Do those smart thermostats have the latest firmware updates? Are they secured? Are they on their own network, or are they connected to the business network? In this case, they were connected to that business's network, even though the business did not install it. The landlord did. That presents a risk. Again, the printers, a lot of times printers are also out of date, or they have, I can't tell you how many times that I've been able to go into a printer's default username and password. Guaranteed almost every time. Are backups secure and current? So if you have a backup, great, you're doing a great job. However, if that backup is not secured from a potential ransomware attack, it's doing you no good, because when they encrypt everything, they're going to encrypt that as well. Do you have a local backup and an offsite backup? So a lot of all of my clients have cloud and local backup. Local is easier to restore from. Cloud backup makes it a little more secure. And then you have your risk assessment. So we've identified everything on the network. Now we have to analyze it and determine what's vulnerable, what could be better. A lot of this is going to be education as well. And what other assets, people, sometimes the business will have Wi-Fi networks, and they will give their employees the Wi-Fi network login. So I want to connect to the Wi-Fi network with my phone. They say, sure, here's the username and password, or here's the network password. So you connect, and now you're on the internal network, the same network that has sensitive data. You should not allow this. If you're going to do this, make sure it's a business device and not a BYOD, bring your own device, the personal cell phone. I have gotten on hospital networks, Wi-Fi networks that are supposed to be for non-employees, for visitors, and seen doctors' laptops on those networks, because it'll say Dr. Smith's laptop, and that is extremely dangerous. And then so you take your threats, your vulnerabilities, and assets, and you identify the risk. It's what a risk assessment is for. This is, one of those programs I talked about earlier, where you watch the movie. I keep thinking of Swordfish, but there are lots of movies that do this, where they have somebody sitting on a computer pressing some keys, and you see a bunch of command line stuff fly across the screen. This is Nmap. Nmap is free. It comes with that operating system I mentioned earlier that's called Kali. It comes with most security operating systems. But you can install it on anything. I have been installed on Windows and other operating systems. And it's free. and you can learn some basics and be able to scan a network for vulnerabilities. So this is an example, a scanned, this isn't my scan, but this is something that was scanned. They scanned, looks like they scanned a terminal server and they found some open ports. So they found Windows RPC, Windows Net BIOS, all these ports are open. This is dangerous. 3389 is remote desktop, and that's open. So now I know remote desktop is open, and maybe I've gone to this company's website and said, and looked at what employees who works there, figured out how they format their usernames, because if you format sgumbar as a username, then chances are everybody's using first initial last name. And then based on what I maybe found on the internet, I can then guesstimate their password for remote desktop protocol. And if they don't have it set up securely, I am now remoted into a user's computer. I checked, it's been a couple of years, but at one point there are websites where you can go and check to see if, let's say, port 3389 remote desktop protocol is exposed throughout the world. And I think right when COVID started, I did this, and it was over 1 million exposed remote desktop protocols in the US. I think the numbers come down because people became very aware that this is a threat. But there are still exposed remote desktop protocols. People are still working from home, and I have no problem with that, obviously. But people are still working from home, so they're going to remote in one way or the other. There are better ways to do it, but remote desktop protocol is what comes with Windows, so it makes it easier. And people by nature will try to do things the easiest way possible. So they're going to use easy passwords, easy to remember passwords. They're going to repeat passwords. If you do that, you're exposing whatever that server connects to, or whatever that computer connects to. Identify what data you have. So this is a service we offer where we can identify what data is on all of your systems. I just set this up for someone else this week, and this is not theirs. This is first run I did with somebody else. So they found $800,000 worth of data, or $800,000 worth of risk, meaning if this system was breached, probably looking at about $800,000 worth of damage. Now, that doesn't include remediation. That doesn't include mitigation for future attacks. It doesn't include, lost revenue, because now your name is being dragged through the mud. If you do have to report it. And the United States is working on a national data protection plan. So similar to GDPR, it is in the House, I think, is the last place I saw it. It did pass the House the last time I saw, which was just a few days ago. So it's I think it's ADPPA. So that's coming. And if we don't get in front of it, then we're looking at even more penalties and fines. Connecticut already has a plan in place. California, New York, I'm not sure New York, Colorado, Connecticut, California, and 2 other states have plans in place already. You have to report no matter what if you are breached. Do you know what websites your employees are? Oh, by the way, this looks for protected health information. It looks for personally identifiable information like driver's licenses, social security numbers, things like that. It looks for, depending on what industry you're in, so you might have PCI compliance. If you take credit cards, you have to have some level of PCI compliance. So it looks for that. If you're in military, so if you're federal, then there's some checks for that as well. Do we know what websites your employees are accessing? So if they're going on Facebook at work, and I understand there's a business need for that in some cases, but if they're going on Facebook at work and talking on Facebook Messenger, and they receive a message from someone on Facebook Messenger who claims to be a friend of theirs, and I've received these messages, and it says, hey, look who died. I've received that exact same message. And they click on the link, and it takes them to some page where it asks them to log in, and they put in their credentials. Your business is now exposed. Or if they're going to gambling sites, adult-oriented sites, things like that, malicious sites, phishing sites, Do we know? Are we protected against that? This is lurking on your network. There are sites that all they do is use your computer's resources to mine for cryptocurrency. So you may have gone to a site where all of a sudden your computer's fan starts racing and computer gets really hot. That website is probably mining for cryptocurrency while you're on that website and using your computer's resources to do it. So DNS filtering helps prevent that. I went into a business, an auto dealership earlier this year, and they have tablets on the floor, the sales floor, and I was charged with going in and making sure that the tablets were updated and so forth. Turns out one of those tablets had driver's licenses, pictures, scans of driver's licenses on it. So this is an iPad that's available to anybody who walks into the sales floor. So it could be a customer, could be an employee, and there were driver's licenses scanned to that iPad. This is the kind of information that, if you're not aware of, could result in a breach. If somebody else finds that and then steals that identity and then tries to use it for any number of reasons, takes out credit cards in it, you're now responsible. Do we know where all of this data is stored? If you're storing this data, is it encrypted? Who has access to it? Where is it? A lot of questions you need to know when you're trying to determine what's lurking on your network. Who has access to it? So this is a good one. Who is accessing this data? Who has access to the controls? Who has access to the building, to the servers, to all of it? So first of all, who is auditing the access controls? Because if I get onto a network as just a regular employee, and maybe I don't have access to all of these things, but I can somehow elevate my access and nobody's paying attention to that. Nobody's looking to see, there are no alerts set up and nobody's looking to see who's been accessing what. You don't have any log files being generated or being monitored. Then how do you know what's going on in your network? This is a very common scenario where an attacker, so in the case of SolarWinds, which I think I was going to talk about later. Oh, I was on the next slide. But in the case of SolarWinds, the rumor was that somebody gained access to an FTP account. In an FTP account, file transfer protocol, they used a simple password. Supposedly the password was SolarWinds123. Now, even if that's not the case, it does happen this way. And so they gain access to this account, which maybe doesn't have any admin access at all. But because now they're in, they can look for other ways to either elevate the access of that account or find other accounts that might have access. So maybe they find that spreadsheet with the admin access passwords. Or maybe they find other accounts on the FTP server that they're connected to. Maybe the code, which is supposedly what happened, the code for this program has the passwords hard-coded into the code rather than dynamically. So now it just says, admin and admin password in the code for the software. Who takes care of employees' access when they leave? Just had a client who let go of an employee. The morning they told me this is the end date, that morning I cut off all access. So who's taking care of that in your business? I've gone into businesses before where their Active Directory server still has old accounts on it, people that haven't been there in years, and they're still active and they still have the same passwords. They were never disabled. And that's the first things I do when I go into a new business is disable any unused accounts. You don't have to delete them, just disable them, because if they're being used for something, you'll find out really quickly when you do that. And also remove all remote access software. So I've gone into businesses where their critical server had 4 or 5 different programs on it to remote access it. This is very dangerous because you don't know who's, if it's been there for years, you don't know who has access to it at that point. What if they move to another position? They may not have, at one point they needed access to those healthcare records. Now they don't. Are you changing their access privilege, their privileges to reflect that? Who is auditing for unauthorized access or privilege escalation? I kind of talked about that earlier. So how do we know a new account wasn't created that shouldn't have been there before? And I've heard stories of this happening in the past. Is your team educated on social engineering attacks? Piggybacking is a common one where somebody will enter the building carrying a bunch of boxes wearing a brown uniform, and you hold the door for them because you assume it's UPS and you're trying to be nice. It's human nature. We want to be nice to people. It wasn't UPS and those boxes were empty. He just wanted to gain access to the building. The answer to that, help him carry the boxes in, have him badge in, or however he's getting in. IT scams, this happens a lot. And I now include in my signature line of my email, we will not call you to ask for your password or to ask for remote access to your computer, because this is very common. And it happened to my business a long time ago. It was probably 10, 12 years ago. I got a phone call saying, you were just on my computer a few minutes ago. I had a different name at the time. This is XYZ business. I said, no, I don't know who you are. I've never accessed your computers before. I'm sorry. This happens a lot. Usually they use Microsoft or Apple, but it can happen where I can claim to be another IT company. Do you have other access control methods in place? Multi-factor authentication is the most common one today. So you log in, it sends a PIN. Most people use text message, but that's not the best way to do it. But it's still better than nothing. Some people use an app. I use the app for some, and then I also have a YubiKey for others, and that is a USB key you plug in your computer, and in order to use that second form of authentication, you actually have to touch that key. Conditional access. So are we only allowing it from certain IP addresses? So depending on what it is, if it's a server with sensitive information, well, it shouldn't be accessed remotely. We should only be able to get in if we're at that location. Are we setting up conditional access based on location or based on time of day? Or, if you're working from home, can we set it up so that only your IP can get on? Things like that. And again, do you have DNS filtering in place? The supply chain risks that I talked about a little bit with SolarWinds, there's been a few more since. There's GitHub. If you're not familiar with GitHub, this is a resource where people are creating projects. So they create an application, a mobile app or something, and they're storing the code on GitHub. And so and there are other places to do this as well, but GitHub is the most well-known one. And so sometimes what happens is somebody gets a hold of that code and then launches it again on GitHub, but then they add their own stuff to the code. And so that's what a supply chain attack looks like. You take code, you add some malicious code to it, and then you send it out to everybody. So now everybody's downloading this code. I'll use Microsoft Windows as the example. It hasn't, they claim it hasn't happened. I don't know for sure. But at least once a month, usually 2 or 3 times a month, Microsoft pushes out updates to Microsoft Windows. If somebody were to access that code and then install some malicious code into that, and then Microsoft pushes that code out to probably billions of computers at this point, billions of computers are now compromised. So it's kind of simplified, and it does happen with maybe not as, it's happened with GitHub repositories in the past. It's happened with SolarWinds. It's happened with Kaseya, which is another tool that is used by IT professionals, where the code is pushed out and it's got some malicious code in it. And those, in the case of Kaseya, I think the number was 18,000 businesses or something like that were ransomware. If you have a line of business application, so you have a business that's growing, you need specific software, or you need software to do specific tasks, so you have somebody create the software for you. Well, who's providing the updates to that software? Who's making sure that that was once secure is still secure? Who's testing it? If the person who developed the program for you is no longer available, who's taking care of it now? And have you implemented zero trust? So zero trust is what's really going to change things. I'm going to tell you the software that I showed the screenshot earlier of where it found $800,000 worth of potential risk also encrypts your files for you. So you check, you find all the sensitive data, and then you encrypt it. And then this way, if it leaves your network, it's not readable. Nobody can read it. Well, I did that on my own network, and I forgot to whitelist it with this security software I have, and instantly I got a whole bunch of alerts because it thought it was a ransomware attack. So something was encrypting all of my data, and it thought it was a ransomware attack. So I have BitLocker already on my computer. BitLocker is already whitelisted by default. This is a secondary method of encryption, and it automatically assumed it was a ransomware attack. If these things are not in place for you, and that wasn't even zero trust, this was something else. If these things are not in place, you're at risk. Zero trust is a process by which nothing is allowed to run without somebody saying it's okay to run. So if I install, let's say Nmap as the example, I talked about that earlier, the zero trust software will block it. And then a window will say, you can request access to this, and then it'll come to me and I'll look at it, see what it is it safe, and I'll approve or deny based on that. That's zero trust. Nothing's going to run without somebody saying, yeah, it's okay. And it's going to be somebody who knows what they're looking at. A lot of times with ransomware attacks, you will click on something and you're not even realizing it's installing another piece of software. And that's where that becomes valuable, or a script. Seems like it might be overkill, but it's kind of necessary. And actually the federal government is now telling all of their agencies they need to have some zero trust set up. I think they started that at the beginning of the year. So what's lurking on your network? So the federal government is working on a national data protection and privacy plan. It is similar to GDPR. It's 121 pages at this point, so I haven't read the whole thing. I did read a kind of a brief description of it. It's called the American Data Privacy and Protection Act, so it is ADPPA. It is, I have here heads for the House floor, but I believe it's already been approved by the House. And it is Connecticut, California, Colorado, Utah, and Virginia are the states, 5 states that have data privacy laws in place, the strictest data privacy laws in the country. So you can imagine if only 5 out of 50 states have laws in place or have strict laws in place for data protection, that 45 states are going to probably have some issues to deal with. Even in Connecticut, we see data breaches almost daily. I see data breach notifications. And I'm only really monitoring for healthcare, maybe financial. So in brief summary, first you have to find out what's on your network. So what devices, including IoT devices. So if you have a thermostat, or there's a story, I have to look it up, but there is a story of a fish tank aquarium thermostat that was hacked. I'd have to look it up, but I do remember reading that story where that gained access to other parts of the network. There is a story out of Florida where somebody got access to a water treatment facility and increased the amount of one of the chemicals used to treat that water by 1,000 times. Fortunately, somebody was paying attention and caught it before the chemical was released. There's a lot of things we need to look at that we're not looking at. Who's getting into your network? If your front door is open and people can walk into your business, what's to stop them from plugging a thumb drive into a computer and launching an attack that way? And that does happen. So how are we protecting against that? So first, what kind of physical access, what kind of network devices, or networked devices, I should say, are on your network? Are your printers secure? Do they have the default usernames and passwords? Do they have the latest firmware? Do your network equipment have the latest updates? What other devices are on your network? Are your employees connecting to your your internal Wi-Fi? So you should have a guest Wi-Fi if you're going to do that. Guest Wi-Fi, your employees can connect to that with their personal devices. But are people connecting to your internal Wi-Fi that way. Then you figure out what the risk is. All right, so we have identified there's a server that has sensitive data. What is the risk? Who has access to that? What is the risk of exposure? What are we looking at as far as financial? If somebody does gain access, what kind of data is there? And then what are you going to do to fix it? You have to fix it once you find it. And those audits, the risk assessment audits, should occur at least once a year. It should be once a year unless there's changes to your environment. So if you have the risk assessment in December and now it's July and you add 10 new employees, well, you should do another risk assessment, because where are those devices coming from? Are they up to date? What access are your new employees getting, and so forth. All right, I did promise free ebook, 11 steps to mitigate the risk of phishing attacks. And this is the web address for it, bit.ly.bizcardnt. If you have my business card, it's also on there already. And then if you'd like to schedule a free data risk assessment, this is the web address for it, my Calendly. Happy to do that for anybody who has questions or concerns about their network. Now, if you have a website that's hosted, it's a little more difficult to do because I'm not going to have access to the host company servers, but we can certainly take a look at the website itself and see if there's any risks. Or if it is shared hosting, we could take a look at that as well. What does happen, I've seen happen in the past, is if you're using shared hosting, Google scans those servers for malware. And even if your website doesn't have malware, but another website on that same shared server has malware, your website will also get flagged. I have seen that in the past happen. And so you'll get an email from Google saying your website has malware. So hopefully everybody got that. And we've got a few minutes for questions, if there are any.
Let's see here. Basically, so we all work independently. We don't really have a network per se in the same sense that you were talking about. Mm-hmm. We do have obviously a website, and everyone and different people have different access to it. We have a couple of folks inside the organization. Most of the access is done through a laptop and an internal home network or a phone. So do you see any real dangers there?
So the data that goes to that website, where is that stored?
Data on the website, it's going to be on the host server.
Okay. So there's not like a Dropbox or a OneDrive account that everybody shares data with. That would be the other risk. So yeah, so there's no interconnection between you and anybody else. So really the biggest concern would be the website at that point, and maybe emails back and forth.
Yeah, and then so we use Google for our email, company email. We have multiple plugins on the website. And again, only access is almost really a virtual company. Everyone has their own access, their own parts, and we don't share passwords. Like I have a password to banking. One partner has one partner has the same password. We share that and we change it. It changes on a regular basis.
Okay.
So that's the only. We don't network anything. But I wanted to see what you're talking about with the networking, because it's important to understand what the risks are out there.
Yeah, is that a WordPress site?
Yes, WordPress site.
Yeah, because I heard you say plugin, so I figured WordPress. So WordPress also does have vulnerabilities. I get alerts whenever there's a WordPress vulnerability. It's usually in the plugins, but it's also sometimes with the WordPress core files. So when those happen, first of all, I usually share that on social media if it's a big one. So you already follow me on social media, so if you see it, then you know to look for it and update. But WordPress is a huge target because, like Microsoft, they're the market share. So they own, I don't know, I think around 40% of the websites are built with WordPress now. That's a lot of websites. So an attacker says, okay, I'm going to look for all the WordPress sites with this vulnerability and attack it. And they do that. The other thing I would be careful of is with passwords just to make sure that nobody's storing them in like Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge. Both of those browsers and Firefox have that feature where you can store the passwords. But the problem is it's very easy to export. So I can log on to, if I got onto your computer and went to Chrome and went to passwords, I could export the list of passwords if I have the password to your computer. That's all you need.
Ah, okay. Good to know.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, that's it.
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it then. If you, if for those that don't know, you could follow us on social media. All of them are Nwaj Tech, any of those platforms. And I plan to do some stuff on TikTok, but haven't really done much yet. And then thanks everyone.
All right, you got it. Take care.